Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I have the first part in a series of videos discussing what the best adaptation is for each Christie novel and short story, and I'm hoping to fit this into two videos. I suspect it might require a third, which, if that is the case, that third part might not come out for a while because I have the schedule set and planned for two videos here, but I'll figure it out. Perhaps I'll save the short stories for a third piece. Now, I'm working on a larger project ranking every Christie adaptation. So, these selections here may or may not remain the best by the time I put out that project, as I'm always, finding new ones and rearranging the order and constantly rearranging it again. There may be spoilers ahead, but they're very, very minor. Like, I'm not going to spoil any, major story points. Now, before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel and join in the Discord server if you haven't already. Link in the description below. I'm going to go in chronological order with the novels first, and we have The Mysterious Affair at Styles, which has quite a few adaptations, but one very clearly stood out. We have the Suchet Poirot. We have a Latvian mini-series, which I have not seen at the time of this recording, and to be honest, I have not seen a lot of these, foreign language adaptations. I'm always trying to find them and track them down and watch them. But again, there's quite a few I haven't seen yet, but I have seen some. And we have the French Le Petit Mort episode, which I thought was pretty bizarre and not in a good way. We have a 2022 Hungarian film. We have audio adaptations as well, including the John Moffat radio version and the Peter Dinklage audible adaptation, both of which were pretty good. But the obvious answer here is, of course, the Suchet adaptation. Again, the Suchets are the gold standard Poirots, in my opinion, and I will probably be deferring to that screen adaptation constantly, especially over in an audio adaptation. As good as John Moffat's radio plays are, I do recommend them, but again, I'm probably always going to pick a screen adaptation when possible. Now, I don't think the Suchet version is perfect. I actually do think the potential exists for a future version to surpass it. And from what I've heard, the Latvian and Hungarian versions aren't that great. And, I do reserve judgment until I've watched them, but the Suchet version is more or less faithful. I actually think maybe is a little too faithful in the sense that I find it may be a little slow at times, but it's still very good and a worthy adaptation, but one I think is definitely open to being surpassed. I should also say there's a stage version of this play, but for the purposes of this video, I'm not really going to include the stage productions. I will mention them just because all the different casts and all the different runs. It makes it rather difficult to assess the stage production performances. We have the Secret Adversary up next, and this was pretty easy. We do have a few. There's a 1929 German silent film that was lost for a while, but it is now found, and it is available on YouTube, but it does not have English subtitles. It is a silent film, but there's writing, but it's all in German. And we have two television versions, the Warwick Annis film and the David Walliams Jessica Raine from 2015. What do you think? It's the Warwick Annis film. Not particularly close. The Walliams Raine one is atrocious, and James Warwick and Francesca Annis are just really delightful as Tommy and Tuppence. And while I think the Secret Adversary film, again, is one maybe a little too faithful, it is far superior to the other possible options, while still being a great film as well. And I should also mention, again, this one also had a stage play at one time as well. And again, I also think this is one that is sort of crying out for maybe a better version. I don't think there will ever be a better Tommy and Tuppence than James Warwick and Francesca Annis, but I do think the possibility exists of better Tommy and Tuppence adaptations. Onto The Murder on the Links, which is another one with a fairly obvious selection here. There is a stage play of this that starred Alfred Molina, who played Poirot, and he previously played Poirot in Murder on the Orient Express, but from what I understand, Molina redeemed his Poirot on the stage here. But we also have the John Moffat radio play, the Suchet adaptation, the Le Petit Mort episode, and a Japanese two-parter. But the pick here is once again David Suchet, and I promise not all the Poirots are going to be the David Suchet versions, but just given the options here, this was a clear selection. The French version resembles very little of the original, and while the Japanese one is interesting, and of course I recommend the Moffat radio play, it just really had to be the Suchet one. This is from an earlier season, which were very faithful and true to the original text, and I just think this one is a job very well done. From The Man in the Brown Suit, we only have two options: the 1988 film with Stephanie Zimbalist and Ken Howard, or the Le Petit Meurtre version. And I'm actually going to pick the French Le Petit Meurtre version. Now, if you don't know, the French series creates stories inspired by Christie novels that are not direct adaptations, but you can very much see the pieces of the originals in there. And the series definitely understands the original text. So the French version of The Man in the Brown Suit is not an international adventure thriller, but more a domestic one, maintaining a lot of the same plot devices. This is from series 2, so it's with Alice and Laurence and Marlene, and Laurence spends a lot of this episode undercover in drag, which very weird. No one even seems to recognize him. But, this episode was a lot of fun. The 1988 film is fine. Again, it does suffer from a lot of these, 1980s Christie films suffer from, that the pacing can be slow and drawn out because they're so faithful. They do everything the novel does. But I definitely prefer the French version. But this was the closest one at this point in the video. For The Secret of Chimneys, there's literally one option in the ITV Marvel adaptation, which is absolutely horrendous. But you know what? When you're the only one, you win automatically. It's currently the best adaptation of the story by default. And as far as I'm aware, there isn't even a radio play of this. So ITV Marvel it is. Moving on. Onto The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, notoriously difficult to adapt. There is a stage play Alibi, the 1931 Trevor Austin film Alibi, which is lost media. There's an Orson Welles 1939 radio play, which, despite what is claimed, is not lost media. It is available online to listen for free. We have the John Moffat radio play, the Suchet adaptation. There's a Japanese adaptation, and it did come down to the Japanese adaptation or the Moffat radio play. And I did pick the Moffat radio play. This is a story that is just so much easier to adapt for the radio than the screen, given the twist. So I did pick John Moffat here, who I think is the gold standard for the radio. And I know a lot of you have pointed out to me my lack of discussion and acknowledgement of these radio plays, and I hope this ameliorates that a bit. I'm not intentionally ignoring the radio plays. It's just to me, that's a very I don't want to say uninteresting subject, but it's a very difficult subject for me to talk about on this sort of format that I do on this channel. But for The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, again, I do think it is the John Moffat radio play. The Big Four, not a popular choice for adapting. We only have one, the Suchet adaptation from 2013, which I actually do like. And this is such a bizarre novel and not a popular one, so it's not surprised there's only one option. And the Suchet one is fine. It does stray considerably, but it's also very understandable why they would do that. And I like the changes that were made. And again, I do have some nostalgia for this episode because it is the one that reunited the original cast after all those years apart. So again, the Big Four by default. For The Mystery of the Blue Train, we only have two options, the Suchet Poirot and the Moffat radio play, and I picked the Suchet Poirot. To me, these are about equal in quality, and because the Suchet one is a visual adaptation, I picked that one. Again, this is not a popular story, and I don't have much to say about it here. They're both faithful, and they have a good setting and all that, so I just picked the Suchet one. And next up is the Seven Dials Mystery, and we only have one adaptation of this from 1981 with John Gielgud and James Warwick. I know there's an upcoming Netflix adaptation that still doesn't have a release date, but we can't include that here because it's not available yet. And the 1981 film, again, is an 80s Christie adaptation. I actually really enjoy this one more than the other 80s standalones. It is very long, however, clocking in at over 3 hours, which is just insane. But I think the more streamlined version could be good, and I'm actually very optimistic for the Netflix version, and time will tell if that one is better than this one or not. But for now, it is the standalone Gielgud Warwick one. On to our first Miss Marple with The Murder at the Vicarage. And if you're a long-time listener, you probably know which of these Marvel adaptations is going to come out on top almost all the time, but not all of the time. But here we have the 1949 play where Miss Marple was played by a 35-year-old actress. We have the Joan Hickson BBC. We have the ITV Marple with Geraldine McEwen, the French Le Petit Meurtre, a West German 1970 TV version, and the June Whitfield radio play, with June Whitfield being the Miss Marple equivalent of the John Moffat radio plays. And to me, the obvious pick here is, of course, Joan Hickson, which is, absolute gold standard for Miss Marple adaptations. June Whitfield is also spectacular. And even the Geraldine McEwen one isn't that bad outside of that one particular moment where they made Miss Marple the other woman to a married soldier, which really tanked that episode's chances of winning here, and it drops it significantly down the list. But Joan Hickson in the production fully understood Miss Marple and all of her stories, so to me that was a pretty obvious selection here. For the Sittaford Mystery, and this one was rough. This one is begging for a good adaptation, or even really just like an average one. We have the ITV Marple, which is definitely in the running for the worst Christie adaptation of all time. It actually didn't make my worst adaptations video because I refuse to even consider it such. It bears no resemblance to the novel. There's also a French Le Petit Meurtre version, which I also did not like at all. It is better than the ITV Marple. That's not really saying much. There is an Indian version called Charlie Chopra and the Mystery of Solong Valley, which I have never seen. But you know what? I was like this close to picking that one with the full confidence that it couldn't possibly be worse than the other two. But that would be weird to pick something I haven't actually watched. So I did pick the John Moffat radio adaptation, which I actually forgot existed until I did research for this video. John Moffat, best known for his Poirot radio plays Mr. Rycroft here. And there really just isn't a bad radio play. And when it comes to the Sittaford Mystery, these adaptations are all pretty bad except for the radio one. So the radio one wins here by a mile. This is probably the easiest win for any adaptation outside of the ones where there's just one. And Peril at End House here has quite a few adaptations. There was a 1940 stage play, a 1989 Soviet film, The Suchet Poirot, and we have a 4-part episode from the Japanese anime Poirot and Marple, Great Detectives, which is an absolutely delightful series. If you haven't watched that, you are missing out. We also have a French Le Petit Meurtre episode, a John Moffat radio play, and a 2007 video game. Yes, video games are adaptations. But again, the clear answer here is The Suchet Poirot, and this is a truly fantastic episode of that series. One of the strongest entries in that series. And I just love the ending with Miss Lemon playing the medium, and the episodes do such a good job of all the emotions and the themes of the novel while maintaining fidelity. This was also the first full-length novel the series did, and it was just nearly perfect in my opinion. Lord Edgware Dies is another novel with plenty of adaptations. We have the Austin Trevor 1934 film, the Peter Ustinov 1985 film, which is terrible, the Suchet Poirot, not to be confused with the Ustinov film, which Suchet also appeared in, the French Le Petit Meurtre, and the John Moffat radio play. And I actually picked the John Moffat radio play here. This book involves a disguise trick, which is so much better in audio than in visual, but the Moffat and the Suchet versions are very good and about equal in my opinion. And while I said I would normally pick the Suchet ones, I do think because of the trick, radio play has the advantage here, and the other three were mostly just simply not really in contention. For Murder on the Orient Express, and there's just so many adaptations here. We have 2 English radio plays, the John Moffat and the 2017 Audible with Tom Conti. We have films with Albert Finney and Kenneth Branagh, a German 1955 TV movie, the 2001 TV movie with Alfred Molina, the 2010 Suchet Poirot, a 2015 Japanese TV version, 2 stage plays, a board game, and 2 video games. And while I do like the Suchet version, I know a lot of people don't, and the Moffat play and the 2023 video game, the obvious pick here was the Albert Finney film from 1974. And this film is really the first one that comes to mind when I think of Murder on the Orient Express, or even when just Christie adaptations. Whenever somebody mentions a Christie film, I just assume they're talking about this 1974 Murder on the Orient Express. It's iconic. And while I do think certain other versions may up it in certain regards, as a whole product, the Finney film is superior to them all, which does make this a little baffling as to why people continue to make new films of this when the Finney version has not been surpassed in 50 years, and I doubt it ever will. For Why Didn't They Ask Evans? This is a novel that had more adaptations than I realized. We have the 1980 film with James Warwick, the ITV Marple for some reason with Julia Mackenzie, an episode of Le Petit Meurtre, and the 2022 Hugh Laurie miniseries with Will Poulter. As much as I like the 80s version and even the French version, the choice was clearly the 2022 Hugh Laurie miniseries, which I think is the best Christie adaptation we've gotten in the past 15 years. Probably the best since the Suchet Poirot series ended. And, it does benefit here from being 3 episodes and extended runtime that allows for more content in there. And again, this is just a novel I'm not fond of, but this adaptation was so good it actually made me like the novel more. And I just love this adaptation. The acting is good, it is relatively faithful to the text, but it makes very small but necessary and thoughtful changes. I loved it, and this is actually one of my favorite adaptations of any Christie novel. I was sort of hoping we'd get more of these like Hugh Laurie standalone adaptations, but I have not heard anything since, which is a real shame. I would love to see him do like The Man in the Brown Suit or something like that. For three-act tragedy, we have the awful Peter Ustinov Tony Curtis film, the Suchet episode, the Le Petit Meurtre episode, and the John Moffat radio play. And this was a three-way race between the Suchet, the Moffat, and the French version. And I actually wound up selecting the French Le Petit Meurtre episode called Drame en trois actes. I thought this version did the impersonation trick very well. The Suchet one sort of like dances around it, and the Moffat radio play obviously doesn't have that issue, but I thought because of the way the trick was done in the French version, it was very excellent and deserved that title. It wasn't obvious, nor did they hide it, and that was a very impressive, I thought. I think that's like a good sort of standard to use when adapting like a Christie novel with an impersonation. And this episode is a lot of fun with Samuel Labarthe in dual roles, being like him being an acting teacher was really funny. For Death in the Clouds, and another one where I think the door is open for an adaptation to come in and surpass the ones we currently have. We have the Suchet Poirot and the Moffat radio play, but my choice for the best is actually the Japanese anime Great Detectives Poirot and Marple. This was the finale of that series, and I just think Suchet one is fine. Like, it makes some changes I didn't particularly care for, and I do find it a bit of a slog, but to be honest, I find the book a bit of a slog as well. But the anime version, it is tough for me to like justify putting an animated version over a live action episode, but I thought it was warranted here. I actually think the animation makes the story a lot more interesting, and the plot is also fairly faithful to the original. It's just very like streamlined, so it loses all of the things that make it slog, which is definitely for the better. And the Moffat radio play is fun, but again, it just sort of had the same issues the Suchet one does. So I did pick the Japanese anime version here. Onto the ABC murders, which is another very popular story to adapt, and to be honest, many of them are either very good or very bad. There's the Tony Randall alphabet murders, which I did name the worst Christie adaptation ever, so that won't be picked. We have 2 radio adaptations, one with John Moffat and one with Charles Laughton. A number of TV adaptations, the Suchet Poirot, a Japanese language one, the French Le Petit Meurtre, which was the formal premiere episode, the Sarah Phelps BBC, but no, and one from India, 2 Japanese anime versions. We have the Poirot and Marple Great Detectives, and we have one from Hyoka, which I had not heard of until I was researching for this video. We have 2 separate video games, an Audible play with Peter Dinklage, 2 Indian films, Grandmaster, and another one. And while so many of these are good, few were atrocious, I did pick the Suchet version. Now, there was stiff competition from the Le Petit Meurtre and the 2 Japanese language versions I have seen, but I thought the acting in the Suchet version was spectacular, especially from Mr. Cust, played by Donald Sumter. I've also heard like a number of listeners from this channel who have named this one as their favorite Suchet Poirot, and while it's not my personal favorite, I do think it is top tier amongst a top tier series. And for Murder in Mesopotamia, which is fairly easy because we only have two, both of them, the standard delicious fare of the Suchet Poirot and the Moffat radio play. And I picked the Moffat radio play. It's not like I don't like the Suchet version, but I do feel like the Suchet episode does not live up to the expectations of the novel or the series, and the John Moffat play does, so I picked him. And if you have not listened to John Moffat as Poirot, I mean, you need to because it's very good. Perhaps the second best Poirot after David Suchet, but when it comes to Murder in Mesopotamia, it is John Moffat who takes the win. For cards on the table, there was a very clear pick for me, but we have five options. I'm really four because one is a stage play. But there's, of course, the Suchet Poirot, the Moffat radio play, a Bengali film called Chorbali, which I have not seen, and the Le Petit Meurtre episode Carte sur Table, which is the one I picked for this novel. The Suchet one is amongst the worst Suchets. It's very bad, but it is one of my favorite episodes from Le Petit Meurtre, and it really nailed the tension and the themes of the novel while remaining faithful to the plot. It is aided by the fact that they just use the recurring characters as the sleuths, but that did help to make this one of the best episodes from that series. Dumb Witness is another one not that often adapted, just your standard Suchet Poirot, the Moffat radio, and an episode of Le Petit Meurtre. And I did pick the Moffat radio play again here. I think the Suchet version makes some changes that I didn't really care for. And to be fair, that was to avoid repeating everything like the novel does. But I just didn't really care for them. Not that the episode was bad by any means. And the French version is very good, and I would have picked that, but it introduced like supernatural elements as fact, which is something I just don't care for, which was a shame. But the Moffat Poirot also does have some of that like repetition from the novel, but at least that's like what the novel does. So I picked that one, even though again it's not one of my favorite Moffat radio plays. I mean, the door for Dumb Witness is wide open for someone new to come in and take the crown. Someone should make this again instead of like a 40th version of Murder on the Orient Express. On to another very popular one, Death on the Nile. We have two stage plays, a 1950 TV play for the Kraft Theater, the Suchet Poirot, a Peter Ustinov film, the Kenneth Branagh film, the Moffat radio play, and two video games. And the obvious pick here is the Ustinov film, and this is in the running for the best Christie adaptation ever. And the rest of these, with the exception of the Moffat and the Suchet, are just like bland as best. And even those two cannot really live up to the Ustinov film, which is just absolutely charming and delightful from start to finish. Personally, I think they should stop making adaptations of Death on the Nile. We have the Ustinov film, and everything else has been like a blur since then, and the novel is way overdone. And I do like the Suchet version. I know a lot of people don't, but the Ustinov just runs laps around him with this story. Appointment with Death is a novel desperately in need of a good screen adaptation. I don't know why it can't get one. We have a stage play that originally starred Joan Hickson, the Peter Ustinov film, an episode of the TV show Danger, which I have not seen and I believe is lost media, the Suchet Poirot, which is very clearly the worst episode of that series, the French Le Petit Meurtre episode, a Japanese version, and the Moffat radio play. And I did ultimately select the French Le Petit Meurtre version with some hesitation. I probably should have picked John Moffat again. The French version is not even set in Jordan, it is set in France, but I thought the plot was largely the same and the acting spectacular, especially from the performer playing Mrs. Boynton or her equivalent character, who is just very domineering, and I would just prefer to select a screen adaptation over a radio play because it has more moving parts, and I think that just appeals to a larger audience here. Like, I'm assuming many of you have not seen like any or all of these versions before, so I would like to introduce you to something I think you'll actually watch or listen to, where I think like the radio plays may not be appealing to a lot of you. Again, not a slight against the radio plays, which I do enjoy, as I have demonstrated my selection so far has been picked, but for here, I did pick the French Le Petit Meurtre. For Hercule Poirot's Christmas, there was a very obvious pick here for me. We have the Suchet Poirot. We have two entries from Le Petit Meurtre. We have the regular season 2 episode, but we also have a precursor mini-series, Petit Meurtre en Famille. And we have the radio play, not with John Moffat, but with Peter Sallis. And by far, the pick is Le Petit Meurtre en Famille, the precursor miniseries. It does feature Le Rossier and Lampion, but it's not really part of the main series, and it's just spectacular. A must watch. This is another in the running for best Christie adaptation ever. It's probably the best non English language adaptation, and it does benefit of having 4 episodes at 90 minutes, so it really allows for filling in out the plot and keeping in every little detail from the novel. And there are some changes, but all of them, fitting with the characters. I just really cannot recommend this enough. Though very weirdly, it doesn't actually take place at Christmas, even though it takes place in December. Again, that's not really necessary. And, the Suchet version, I do like the sort of side plot of Poirot trying to find a gift for Jap. That's really nice, but I do think the mystery of that one lacks a bit. And I mean, it really can't compete with Petit Mort en Famille. Back to a non Poirot novel. It's been a while here. We have Murder is Easy. Again, another one really in need of like a smash adaptation. Not as desperately as Appointment with Death, but still. I mean, we have a stage play. We have the 1982 Olivia de Havilland Helen Hayes film, the disaster ITV Marple with Julia Mackenzie, a French Le Petit Meurtre episode, the 2023 BBC miniseries, and a radio play. And I picked the most recent of these, the BBC miniseries with David Johnson and Penelope Wilton. And my opinion of this one went up since it first aired. I just reviewed it for the channel, and I think it was a pretty solid. But again, I do think there's room for a better version. But for now, this is the pick, and it's a decent pick. I enjoyed this one a lot more on my recent rewatch, and there are some notable issues. But when compared to the other options, I mean, there wasn't much of a competition, to be honest. The Helen Hayes one is awful. The ITV Marple amongst the worst adaptations ever. Even the French one I didn't enjoy as much. So I mean, the choice was clear here for the BBC. And now for the most adapted book, and then there were none. Let's run through these as quickly as I can. For the films, we have 1945 Rene Clair, 1965 George Pollock, 1965 Hindi language Gumnam, 1974 Harry Allen Towers, the infamous 1987 Russian version, 1989 Harry Allen Towers, 2014 film Sabotage, at least that one claims to be an adaptation. We have the 2015 Atagara Indian film, 2 radio plays, one from 1947 and one from 2010, 3 separate stage play versions. For the television, 1949 BBC, 1959 ITV, 2015 Sarah Phelps BBC, 1959 NBC, 1957 Brazilian series, 1963 Brazilian series, 1969 West German series, 1970 French, 1974 Lebanese, 1978 Greek, 2011 Spanish, 2014 Lebanese, 2017 Japanese, French 2020 Ils étant dit, which I have discussed on this channel before, and at least one video game. And there are others I missed, I'm sure, including a bunch of parodies and like unofficial inspirations, including the Family Guy episode, and then there were fewer, which I love. I hate Family Guy, but I love that episode. And this was a tough one, not because of the sheer amount of options, but because I think one of these is vastly superior in quality than the rest, but I have a lot more affection and love for 3 other ones, but I did ultimately decide on the one I think is the best in quality, and believe it or not, that is the Sarah Phelps BBC version, which I cannot believe I'm giving Sarah Phelps a win here, considering her other entries, but I do think this version is the most faithful to the novel, while also having a spectacular cast, and this is really only one of a few of these versions that actually captures, like, the past trauma the previous deaths have on the remaining members, both the ones on the island and the ones haunting their past. Now, I used to consider this one like a truly elite Christie adaptation. I've gone down on it a bit since then, since it's no longer like a top 10 adaptation for me, but more like a top 25-ish. I do think the changes made to the past murders does warp who the characters are in a way that I didn't like. It's not so splashy or obvious as a change, but it does demonstrate either an ignorance of the text or a willful ignoring of it. Now, the 3 I have a lot of affection for are the 1945 Rene Clair film, the bizarro Russian one, and the video game, which is, a little different, but I played that PC game like dozens of times as a kid. But in terms of quality, I do think I have to pick the Sarah Phelps BBC version. For Sad Cypress, we have our usual fare, the Suchet Poirot, the Moffat radio play, and season 1 episode of Le Petit Meurtre. And this might be an unpopular pick here, but I did go with the French Le Petit Meurtre episode, Je ne suis pas coupable. And I know a lot of people love the Suchet version, and I do think it improves a lot on the book, but I did pick the French one for being more fun while also keeping a lot of the mechanics of the novel. This is an episode with Le Rossier and Lampion, where Lampion spends a lot of the novel in drag as like a militant suffragette. I also feel as if the French version amends a lot of the plot holes from the novel while being more entertaining. I suspect I will get complaints over this one because I know the Poirot Sad Cypress is popular, but this novel has been a bit of a thorn in my side, pun not intended, on this channel because I know I like this novel a lot less than everyone else seems to do, and I always get complaints about my opinions on it, but agree to disagree here, folks. We only have two options for one to buckle my shoe, and they are the Suchet Poirot and the Moffat radio play. And I did pick the Suchet Poirot, and as lackluster as this novel is, I do think the Suchet adaptation really bolsters my feelings about it. This adaptation is so strong. I love the tension and the mood of it. It's darker than the novel, but it really works. And I think because the novel is just like so, it sort of gave permission for production to really change it ever so slightly but powerfully so into like a very good product. I remember when I first watched this episode, I didn't even really like want to because the book is not my favorite, but this episode I think is probably the best Suchet episode in terms of how much it improves over the original work. And of course the Moffat radio play is good, but I do think the Suchet version does something a little extra special. We have a few choices for Evil Under the Sun, and most of them are pretty good. This has multiple just excellent adaptations, including the Moffat radio play, the Suchet Poirot, the Ustinov Poirot. There's a video game that I think is one of the best Christie video games. The only one that's not great here is Le Petit Meurtre version. Again, that's not terrible though. But the choice was clear for me, and that is the Ustinov Poirot. And I think this is even better than the Death on the Nile Ustinov. I know that might be a controversial pick, but this is a truly elite adaptation, an iconic film with an iconic cast and iconic moments. It may not be as faithful as it could have been, but it's not like the Suchet one is either. Actually, outside of the Moffat play, the video game is probably the most faithful one, believe it or not. But this version of Evil Under the Sun is truly spectacular. Just one of my favorite films of all time. So, I mean, this was the clear selection for me. For N or M, and what an absolute travesty here. There is only one adaptation, and that is the David Walliams Jessica Raine adaptation, which is absolutely atrocious. It's very bad. We don't even have a radio play of this novel, so it has to be this one, which I hate. I mean, what a travesty this is. And to think the series won 50% of the novels it was eligible for, I suspect literally any new adaptation would pass this. Even like a Sarah Phelps or even like a Kenneth Branagh. Like, what are people waiting for? I do know there is that upcoming new like Tommy and Tuppence series. I sort of suspect it's going to be original material. I don't think we're going to get adaptations of Tommy and Tuppence novels from it. Maybe we'll get like elements of it, but we'll see if they do N or M in any sort of form. I suspect it can't possibly be worse than this one. Finally, back to Miss Marple with The Body in the Library, which is a popular one to adapt. We have the Joan Hickson BBC, the Geraldine McEwen ITV atrocity, the French Le Petit Meurtre, the Korean Misma Nemesis, which is a very good but very sort of different series I have not yet covered on this channel, but have been meaning to, and the June Whitfield radio play, and most of these are good. Of course, the exception is the Geraldine McEwen one, which could have been good, but they actively sabotaged that. But of course, the pick is Joan Hickson, BBC, and this was the first BBC Joan Hickson, and I think one of the best as well. It really captured the story and the character of Miss Marple, who in this one does get a bit pushed aside for all the other detectives running around, but it does a good job of showing us who Miss Marple is and how she operates without delegating her to background character status, as does happen sometimes in the novels. And just another very good Joan Hickson adaptation. For Five Little Pigs, we have a 1960 play Go Back for Murder, the Suchet Poirot, the Le Petit Meurtre episode, a 2018 Bengali film called Portrait, and the John Moffat radio play. And I selected the Suchet Poirot, and I think this might be the best adaptation of any Christie novel ever. It's certainly in the running. The emotional tension of this episode is through the roof. It captures every little subtle detail imaginable and does so in a way that avoids repetition. This is not an easy novel to adapt because of its structure. You can either ignore the structure and just tell the story, but then you lose what makes this novel special, or you can use the structure and risk falling into repetition very easily. But the Suchet Poirot avoids all of the pitfalls and creates this truly elite adaptation that is near perfection. I cannot imagine there ever being an adaptation of this novel better than this one. I just don't. And then we have The Moving Finger. We have the Joan Hickson BBC, the Geraldine McEwen ITV, the French Le Petit Meurtre, an arc from Ms. Ma Nemesis, and the June Whitfield radio play. And this is one of two Miss Marple novels that I think the ITV version is better than the Joan Hickson version. Unfortunately for Geraldine McEwen, I still didn't pick her this time, but I instead went with the French episode Les Plumes Empoisonnées from Le Petit Meurtre. And this one has Le Rossier et Lampion moving to a quiet country village where much of the same plot happens. And I thought the French version really captured the novel in a way the Joan Hickson version and the other ones did not. I actually think the Joan Hickson Miss Marple here is the worst from Joan Hickson, and I also think that one is the worst of all of the possible options. But the French version really captures the story properly in both plot and setting without getting like ridiculous like the McEwen version does. And I do feel as if this one just sort of like is pulling the best of all the other ones together. So I did pick the French Le Petit Meurtre episode. And that is it for part one of this series. That is about half. That is actually exactly half of the Christie novels gone through. And let me know in the comments if I've missed any adaptation from these. I tried to be all-inclusive and mentioned every single one, but I'm sure something got lost around. There are a lot of these going on. But next week I will have part two of this. I will hopefully finish this up. I will do the rest of the novels, which should be a shorter section because there's just less options from the more recent novels, and also some of them don't have adaptations at all. And hopefully I will also get to the short stories in that. If not, it will just be the novels, and I'll save the short stories for a different video some other time. But until next time, Mystery Files.